Hi boys and girls, today we're going to review being able to find the volume of a rectangular prism using a formula. Last week we've been talking about volume is the amount of space inside of a three-dimensional shape. We also worked on the formula. Volume is equal to length times width times height. In today's model problem, we'll be practicing how to compare the volume of two rectangular prisms. Before we begin that, let's just do a warm-up problem just to get our minds thinking about volume. The problem says, what is the volume of the solid below? We talked about with these types of solids, it's an irregular solid. That means in this particular shape, you can't necessarily use the formula length times width times height because all layers are not equal. So we're going to have to really think about what the first layer has, how many cubes are in the first layer. And then once we figure out how many cubes are in the first layer, we can look at the top layer. Now, we've also talked about that top layer has to be sitting on something. That top layer isn't floating in the air. There has to be cubes on the bottom holding it up. So let's go ahead and figure out the first layer, and then once we figure out the first layer, we're going to figure out the first layer and the second layer, how much that would be together. So for the first layer, we can see here that the first layer shows us the length, right? We can see that there are 4 cubes that make up the length. We can also see the width. We see that there are 3 cubes that make up the width. Okay, we can multiply 4 times 3 and that'll give us 12. So on the bottom layer of the prism, there are 12 cubes there. Now you might say, wait a minute, I only see 8. Remember, underneath these cubes that are on top, there has to be 4 cubes on the bottom holding it up. So when you calculate the 8 that you see plus the 4 in the back, you'll see that you have 12 cubes. Now I'm going to take the 12 cubes and add it to the 4 cubes that are here on top. And when I add 12 plus 4, I get 16. So the volume of this solid is 16 cubic inches. Now let's move on to today's model problem. So in today's model problem, we're going to be comparing the volume of 2 rectangular prisms. And we're going to use the symbols less than, greater than, or equal to. In everything we do, we want to make sure we're showing all our mathematical thinking. So let's look at the first prism. We're going to find out the volume of the first prism. Remember the formula. Volume equals length times width times height. So let's go ahead and find out the dimensions of the first prism. So the first prism, the length, we can count is, we have 3 cubes there. The width, we can count, we have 2 cubes there. And the height, how many cubes does it take to make the height? Well, 1, 2, 3. 3 cubes. So my length is 3, my width is 2, and my height is 3. So let's go ahead and plug that into my formula. Remember, the formula for volume is length times width times height. Now that I plugged my numbers in, my length is 3 times my width is 2 times my height, 3. Now let's go ahead and do the calculations. 3 times 2 is equal to 6, and then 6 times 3 is equal to 18. So my volume for the first prism is 18 cubic inches. Now that I have my volume for my first rectangular prism, which is 18 cubic units, I could go ahead and calculate the volume for my second prism. So let's go ahead and find the volume of the second prism. All Alright, let's first find our length. Our length is 2 cubic units. 1, 2, just so that we can count. Our width is 2 cubic units. Count. 2 cubic units. And then our height. Let's calculate that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 cubic units. Now let's go ahead and plug in our numbers into our formula. Now that we plugged in our numbers, we can see that the length is 2, the width is 2 times the height, which is 5. Let's go ahead and do the calculations. Alright, so we have 2 times 2 equals 4, and then 4 times 5 equals 20. So the volume of the second prism is 20 cubic inches. Now that we calculated the volume for the first and the second, the first one is 18 cubic units and the second one is 20 cubic units, we can now find out which prism has more cubes. Is it the first cube or the second cube? Which prism has more cubes? So remember, the first prism has 18 cubes and the second prism has 20 cubes. So let's go ahead and put our dots on our smaller number, which is the 18. 2 dots on our larger volume, which is 20. And then we'll connect the dots. So we can see that the first prism is less than the second prism. Alright, let's complete the exit ticket following this video.